Rockets fans, welcome to the Rockets Launch Pod, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets. Whoa! Sports Talk 790. Rockets. 3 to go! Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Rockets Launch Pod starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome back to another episode of the Rockets Launch Pod presented by Clutch Fans. I'm Ben DuBose. He's Paulo Alves. We're your hosts. It's Wednesday, the 20th of May, and it's unfortunately the offseason for the Rockets. We last spoke a couple of weeks ago when the Rockets had their end-of-season press conference with Ime Udoka and Rafael Stone, head coach and GM of the team. Both are returning to at least somewhat of a mixed reaction from fans. I understand why, after a relatively underwhelming season and a first-round playoff exit, that there are some reservations, there are some concerns. And so since then, it's been relatively quiet on the Rockets front. At this point, we're mainly waiting for June when trade season kicks up around the NBA leading up to the draft. There's also negotiations to be had with Amen Thompson and Tari Eason in terms of their next contracts. Maybe there's a restructuring to be had with Fred VanVleet, similar to what happened this time a year ago. But that's all likely to happen in June as we get closer to the draft and the new league year starting at the end of the month. For now, there's less going on, at least that we know, from Toyota Center, because the main activities around the league are, well, certainly the playoffs, which are now in the conference finals, but also the draft combine and the draft lottery immediately before the combine. And so those developments the last couple of weeks could have some implications for the Rockets, and that's what we're going to try and unpack on today's show. In terms of the more micro things, as far as the negotiations the Rockets will have internally with their own players, any trades or draft picks they might make next month, we'll pick that up in next week's show when we're actually getting close to June. This is going to be a little bigger picture and looking at some of these recent developments at a league-wide level and what some of the implications may be for the Rockets. And I'll start with the headline item, which is certainly the ongoing playoffs and what looks like a heavyweight fight between the top two teams in the West, the Oklahoma City Thunder and the San Antonio Spurs. It's the first time that there's been a meeting of two 62-plus win teams in a playoff series since the 1998 NBA Finals. So the first time this century. And I think after a game one in which the Spurs won in double overtime, Wemby went absolutely bananas. I think what's pretty clear is that everything we saw in the regular season is in fact translating. So there's no one, well, not that you would expect it on the Thunder because they won the championship last year, but with the Spurs, as young as they are, there's no one that's not built for the moment. There's no one that can't hold up under the bright lights. There's no durability concerns when you scale up the minutes and the usage of someone like Victor Wembanyama. They are real. They are spectacular. So are the Thunder, who should still be able to make this a very competitive series. And unfortunately, when you're in that next tier of the Western Conference, there's going to be some ramifications. And for me, Paulo, this feels like a paradigm shift. You know, the last few years in the NBA, and I think it may have led to a false sense of security with where the Rockets were, at least amongst the fan base, in terms of their positioning and their ability to win a title in the short term. You know, last year they were number 2 in the West, but they were 52-30. They actually had the same record as the number 5 seed this year. It's just, there's been a lot of parity the last few years, really since the start of the decade. You know, the 2021 Bucks, the 2022 Warriors, those weren't super teams by any stretch of the imagination. The 21 Bucks, they lose the title if KD's shoe is one size smaller. And that was against the Nets team that had both James Harden and Kyrie Irving missing significant time with injuries in the playoffs. The Warriors, you know, it was the last gasp of, at least at a championship level, the golden era Warriors, but they were not a great team. Even the Nuggets in 23, the Celtics in 24, very good teams. I don't think you'll look at them as anything close to all-time greats. But I think the pendulum has started to swing the last couple of years. The Thunder were a great team in the regular season. Folks wondered how it would extrapolate to the playoffs. It did. They won a title. Now there seems to be another team also in the West, unfortunately, that's at that level. And so now the bar is just much higher. And so if you're another team, especially in the West, that's trying to win a title the way the Rockets are, and right now is in that group of teams below the top two, somewhere in the mix with the Lakers, the Nuggets, the Timberwolves, this year at the bottom of that tier, although Rockets didn't have Fred VanVleet and Steven Adams in the playoffs, didn't have Kevin Durant either. Maybe things are a little bit different with those guys, but the point is you're certainly not anywhere close to those top two. And I know it's easy to say, well, there have been super teams before and things happen. You can point to the fact that the Rockets last decade, they went after the Warriors when Steph and KD and Draymond and Clay were together, and the Rockets came a hamstring away, maybe a Scott Foster away, to catching them in the late 2010s. I think that's different on a few fronts. I mean, those Warriors were better than those teams that I listed at the start of the 2020s, but relative to the current landscape with the Thunder and the Spurs, those Warriors teams, the key players were getting close to 30, so there was a chance that they could start to age out or at least decline a little bit. The Thunder and the Spurs, most of the key players are 26 years old and younger. And also with the Warriors, as older players, they're typically closer to their contracts expiring, maybe for business reasons. They look elsewhere. Kevin Durant in 2019 did move on. So many of the players in this Thunder Spurs series are on their first NBA contract. So they're under club control for a long time. Even if they make it to free agency, they'll be restricted and their teams can match any outside offer. Now, maybe the CBA eventually makes it tough to keep those teams together, but I think we're a ways away from getting to that point when you look at the specifics of the financials. So I just think the ages of these two teams, as young as they are, the fact that it's two teams instead of one, and finally, like the current version of the Rockets is not really a good analog for when the Rockets and James Harden and Daryl Morey went all in last decade, because James Harden was a top 10 player. Those Rockets were much more comparable to the Nuggets or the Timberwolves, teams that have, a Nikola Jokic and Anthony Edwards, a very rare talent, the likes of which you are much more inclined to immediately go all in because the opportunity with that player in his prime is just that precious. You can't afford to squander it. Kevin Durant at 37, 38 next season, very good player. It's not anywhere close to that type of situation. So I just don't think the landscape is quite the same when you look at the ages, two teams versus one. I don't think the Rockets themselves are in the same spot. And I mean, even if, you look at the Rockets with Harden and Morey, they went all in, and 3 years later, the entire thing blows up and they have to, restart with the rebuild we just went through from 2020 through 2023. So it's not that you're guaranteed success if you go that route either. So I just feel like, we'll talk today about the implications for this offseason and beyond, what it means in terms of, staying the course, going all in, taking a strategic step back, as Rafael Stone called it at his end of season press conference. We talked about that a little bit in our last pod. But I just think the main thing I want to hit home off the top, it really does feel like to me a paradigm shift. We are not in the NBA that we were in even a couple of years ago. These are two behemoths at the top of the Western Conference. They are not going anywhere for the foreseeable future. And so because of that, the Rockets are going to have to be much more strategic with how they build out their team, the timeline, and everything that comes with that over this offseason and beyond. I'm not saying they can't build a championship team. I'm not saying that all hope is lost, but I am saying that looking at how great those teams look at the top of the Western Conference and seeing the way those rosters are built, how young the key players are, the flexibility that the Spurs still have to, as you pointed out on Twitter, Paulo, get even better in terms of supporting cast. Like, we've got to have an honest conversation about where the Rockets fit in terms of their hierarchy in the West, just how big the gap is relative to those top two. And because of that, the implications for roster building this offseason and beyond. I guess that's where I want to start the conversation. When I watch the Thunder and the Spurs, it's just a reminder that, hey, the top of the West, that bar is way higher than I wanted to think even last offseason. And It's not that the Rockets can't get there, but it's going to take a lot of work and some very hard decisions can't be made. Paolo, what was your, I guess, immediate reaction to that classic double overtime game one, Thunder and Spurs, and, watching those teams trying to sort of forecast out as a Rockets fan how you can possibly get to that level in the next few years?
Yeah, I think the main takeaway, and you hit it, you hit this on a little bit as well, is if they stayed as they are currently constructed, they would be hard to reach. They are already really elite teams. I would say that there's no other teams in the NBA even in the same tier as the Spurs and OKC right now. The scary part is that it doesn't take much for them to get exponentially better, and they have so much left in the tank, both development-wise and assets-wise, to get better if they need to, right? And if they need to part is really the key here, because the Spurs are up one, like they won game one away again, or in OKC against the Thunder, and this year felt like for them what last year felt like with the Rockets, which is, let's see what we got. Let's not make any rash decisions. Let's not heavily invest into this roster assets-wise at the deadline. Let's see where we are and then know what gaps there might be to fill on the roster and then move accordingly. That's the state the Spurs are at. They still have their own first-round picks and picks that they acquired through their tank. They still have Wemby is going to become an even better player than he is now, especially offensively, and that's scary. Stephon Castle is someone who I didn't expect to be this good, but if he is this good, that's scary as well. Is it Derek Harper? Or am I messing up his name? I'll just call him Harper. Sorry, I know he has brothers and the father that were in the league. I might be confusing that one, but he's a baller as well, and I project him to be a superstar. I think if he were on the Rockets, he'd be the best prospect on this team, even above Aman Thompson. And the role players they have, Harrison Barnes, Champagnie, Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, they might be shooting well this playoff run, but you look at their career stats and you look at their regular season stats, and they aren't all that different from what the Rockets have shooting-wise. And they're worse defenders than a lot of what the Rockets have. So there's so much meat still on the bone for the Spurs to get even better. Either being by development, which is going to happen because the Spurs are an insane developmental team, or because they have the assets to make it better, and the spots on the rosters to make it better. Because sometimes teams have the assets, but there's no clear gaps on the roster that you can go and see, hey, you could upgrade on this.
And by the way, it's Dylan Harper, not Derek, to clarify. Son of Ron Harper. I'm
pretty sure there's a Derek Harper.
There is, yeah. He started for the 1994 Knicks on their finals team that lost to the Rockets. So I understand where it's coming from, but just want to clarify. I didn't want to interrupt you in the process, but it's Dylan.
Nah, it's all right. So there's just, they are such, I guess, an unpolished roster, and they are already this good because Wembanyama is going to be, in my opinion, the best player of all time. If for nothing else, because you're looking at a player that's going to be able to impact a much higher percentage of the possessions than any other all-time great we've ever seen. In the sense that, which is why the center position is the most valuable in the NBA, Wemby doesn't have to be fed in the post, so offensively he can impact literally every single possession, and he will, if for nothing else, by warping the way you have to play defense. So he's going to impact 100% of the possessions he's on the floor for offensively. And defensively, it's not like LeBron or Jordan, where they are good defenders, but you can scheme them out, right? You can try to play away from them defensively. With a center, you can't do that, especially one as skilled as Wemby that can switch really well with his length, or as well as you possibly can without playing lockdown, basically hugging our guy defense. And so he's going to be able to impact literally every single possession, both on offense and on defense, and that's something that we haven't seen from an all-time great since, well, probably Tim Duncan. And I think Wemby's going to be a better offensive player, and probably maybe a better defensive player as well. Who knows? And so it's just insane the level of impact that he's going to have, and we're just scratching the surface of what that's going to be. And turning it to what the OKC, I don't think we even need to talk about much about OKC. Everybody knows their three best players locked up on max contracts are all superstar level or projected to be, and they're going to continue to get better because at least Chet and Jay Will are still young. Jay Will, because he was started the season, is not going to be on a super max. He's going to be on a normal max, which helps the Thunder team building wise going forward as well. And then everybody knows how many picks the Thunder have to show up this roster. And at the same time, they are one of the deepest teams in the league, and they just stumbled upon a 6th man of the year guy that will probably be a starter and maybe a star in some other teams. Maybe he would on the Rockets as well. Like, we wish the Rockets had a guy like that in AJ Mitchell. And so moving forward, they are also only going to get better. And so when you evaluate this from a Rockets perspective, sorry for going so long on why these teams are going to be great, it's not even like the James Harden years with the Warriors, because there's two teams that you got to get through. It's not like you're not going to meet the Warriors in the Western Conference Finals and hope that some year luckily you break through, or you hope that someone may be hurt and you get through. No, you have to get through two teams. You have to have an outlier bad season or an outlier injury to two teams in order to be able to get through, which makes it even more unlikely. Yeah, you can even hope that someone knocks them out before they get to you, because that's unlikely, first of all. And then you still have to go to the other one. And so knowing that, you have to be very pragmatic about what it takes to win against those types of teams and what it takes to win in the NBA in general. And I think between the Warriors dynasty and what's starting right now, as you said, a paradigm shift, there were a few years where different, quirky, fun team construction strategies got you to the NBA, to the finals, and got you to winning NBA championships. We got a very classic, a very classic team build with those fun CP3, Booker, Aiden, Mikal Bridges, Suns team. We got, the typical bruiser superstar power forward with Giannis. We got the center hub with Jokic that happened as well. And that's fun, but that wasn't going to last forever. And we've come to a time where you're going to have to start building teams taking into consideration what the rest of the league looks like, not necessarily about making your team the best it can possibly be. And we've seen with the Warriors, and it's going to be even more so this time, the way you play the most efficient basketball possible in the NBA is you get switching 1 through 5, and you get spacing, and you get a guy that can consistently create advantages, or multiple guys that can consistently create advantages offensively. Ideally 2 of them, because one of them may be having an off night. And this is what you need just to be able to compete and have an outside shot at beating these generational type of teams, right? Because it's not necessarily that the Thunder have generational talent or a generational one guy, but they have a generational group of players and a generational level of assets for the talent that they already have. And with the Spurs, they just have a generational talent with Wemby, and they might have one as well with Harper. And Castle's looking really good, and they have all the assets to pile on top of that as well. So when you look at it, you've got to be really, really pragmatic. And you've got to understand that if there's any doubt about your young core, if they project to be these types of players, or if they stop you from being able to build this type of team, then you've got to be really pragmatic and understand that investing into a young core like that is just delaying the inevitable. And nobody wants to be the Damian Lillard Portland Trail Blazers. Nobody wants to be the Donovan Mitchell Utah Jazz. Nobody wants to be, I guess, trying to think of more examples that from recent memory, but nobody wants to be those teams. Those teams are a step below what even the Rockets were. And a lot of people wouldn't consider the James Harden Rockets a successful team because they never got to the finals, they never won a championship, and that's the ultimate goal. And so, translating that to what the Rockets are now, even if everything went according to plan, or everything projectable went according to plan, and I don't think it's fair to project Amen Thompson to be a reliable shooter, and I don't think it's fair to project that Alperen Sengun is going to be a good shooter and a good defender at this level. So when you look at what the Rockets have, how hard you have to squint to imagine that team being generational, because that's what the Rockets are up against. And I think you have to squint really hard. And we talked about before about fooling ourselves and projecting things that aren't there. And I think we'll talk about this more in depth. And I'm sorry for going on for so long. I'll pass it back to you, Ben. But what this series and this series will continue, and we'll get even more evidence of this. What this series opened my eyes to is we are really, really far away, and we are no longer building a team that could have been successful in the NBA for the last 5-7 years.
Yep.
Since the Warriors dynasty fell apart, they slowly faded into the distance. That's not what the Rockets have to aim for anymore. The Rockets have to aim for, again, for a James Harden Rockets level team. And even that wasn't enough. And I don't think the Rockets, as currently constructed, even project to be a James Harden level team, because there's no James Harden level talent. Maybe you could argue that eventually Amen Thompson could have similar impact if you combine his defensive prowess with some high-end outcome of what his offense could become. Maybe you could project the James Harden level impact, but then you look at the rest of them, and there isn't, it's not there. And a lot of the players we have, namely Sengun, prevent us from having the efficiency level of basketball, both offensively and defensively, that is required when you don't have an alien or just an outrageously talented team like the Thunder have, with the assets that they have. And you might think, well, if you go get Giannis, you get that guy. But now you have still a less talented team than those guys, but you don't have the assets to continue to invest into it, and you're on a shorter timeline than they are. You're playing a losing game on every front. Yeah. And this may be something that's really hard to maybe sell to ownership, or something that may be hard to sell to fans, and something that may be hard to realize yourself as an executive, because you've been invested into these guys for so long. Sunk cost fallacy is a thing, and sometimes you get attached to these players of what you thought that they could be. And I'm not saying that this is what's happening, not at all. But when you see these two teams play, you've got to be incredibly pragmatic, at the risk of becoming a nameless franchise, like what the Blazers were with Damian Lillard, and what the Jazz were with Donovan Mitchell, that never truly stood a chance to achieve what the ultimate goal in basketball is, which is winning a championship.
I'm glad you mentioned timeline at the end of your comments, because that's what I keep coming back to. I think there are three main paths that you could go down. You could make the all-in move as aggressive as you could be to maximize your odds in whatever's left of Kevin Durant's prime. There's the moves around the margins path, which is sort of stay the course, better optimize your spots towards the end of the depth chart, to where there's a better mix, as Ime Udoka put it after the season ended, and just continue forward with the draft picks you have, reinforce the young core as you need it. Or you can look at the strategic step back, which we talked about in our last pod. To me, the timeline component of all this makes the all-in type of move, i.e. the Giannis deal, by far the least attractive of all. It's just so important when you look at actually, having a year where the stars align, or somehow the model changing, to give yourself as much of a runway as possible. There is no reason to expedite and shorten the timeline unless you think the move is going to actually put you at the tier of whoever your toughest competition is. And I don't see even adding Giannis to this team for Alperen Sengun and filler putting the Rockets at the tier of OKC or San Antonio next season. And by the way, Giannis turns 32 years old later this year, and he just missed more than half the season due to injury. So I think the longer your runway is, the better, because the more chances there are that some years, those teams get hurt. maybe the CBA kicks in and they can't keep the team together. Maybe Dylan Harper becomes to the Spurs what James Harden was to the Thunder in the early 2010s, a guy who sort of wants his own team, and or economically it's just very difficult to make the numbers work. Like, there are a lot of directions that this could go. Maybe, the high workloads early in their careers, maybe Wemby's body starts to break down by his late 20s, similar to Yao Ming with the Rockets. I don't know. Like, the point is, it's unrealistic. Like, your title odds are not optimized, heavily weighting the next 2 seasons, unless you feel strongly that after a certain deal, you realistically have a chance. And I just don't see any player conceivably on the market this offseason, not Giannis, not Donovan Mitchell, although I think Mitchell's probably no longer on the market now that the Cavs advance to the Eastern Conference Finals. I just don't see putting a lot of future draft capital, which inherently shortens your timeline, as being worthwhile in this environment. To me, those picks are even more important now. They give you more bites at the apple. Maybe, one or more of those players turns into a true top shelf star or difference maker. Maybe they fit stylistically into the model that you were just describing. Inherently, they keep your team younger to where you're less likely to age out by the time one or both of those teams ever does decline, whatever the reason is. It's just, for me, like, I'll get into the other 2 scenarios in a minute, but I want to start with the all-in. Like, I feel like in a perfect world, the Rockets would be able to add another all-star to Kevin Durant and be all-in next season. And, as recently as a few months ago, I feel like a lot of the fan base was on board with pursuing that path. To me, that's the worst thing you can do now, assuming we're talking about a deal where you have to invest, significant trade assets to make it happen. Like, I just don't see, to me, beyond the stylistic elements, beyond just the obvious of, you've got to get more talented, it's the time window that's so important here. And I just think any discussion of how the Rockets eventually get beyond those 2 teams, it's got to start with maximizing your window, and that's not making an all-in splash move for someone like Giannis this offseason, right?
Yeah, I'm with you. It's not like making a move like that was something that was questionable before we were aware of how good these teams truly were. And now it's just a no-brainer, something you don't do. First of all, when you look historically, and this is typically the argument against it, is these superstar trades typically don't result in a championship. And typically, they only happen when that team that makes the superstar trade becomes an instant title favorite or a top 3 title favorite. Like, look at the most slam dunk example of this. The Nets traded for KD and they signed KD and Kyrie, and then they traded for James Harden, and they had an insane big 3, unstoppable offensive team. They were just annihilating everybody in the playoffs until they started getting hurt. And James Harden wasn't quite himself, and that's what tore them apart. When they made that move, when they made those moves, they were championship favorites. They were the team to beat and the team everybody expected to get to the finals. If the Rockets made a move for Giannis, or anybody else for that matter, that's win now. If it's Giannis, they will be older than any of the Nets guys except for Kyrie. But main point being, they won't be even close to championship favorites, even if they do make that move. So to me, like, you couldn't convince me of a move like that before. Right now, I think that's the definition of championship or bust, and I don't think it even gets you in the picture for a potential championship in the next 2 years, which is what you'd be trading those guys, what you'd be trading for Giannis for. And then at the end of it, you're barren of assets, and you're gonna have to start it all over again. And so I'll let you get into the other scenarios so we can go back and forwards. But to me, if a trade if it got announced right now that the Rockets traded for Giannis, I'd be desolated, and that's not how you should feel when a team trades for a superstar player.
Yeah, I would not understand it at all unless somehow the price was just ridiculously cheap to where basically it's Şengün and nothing else. And I can't see that being the outcome. There's going to be teams, especially those in the East, who I think are more incentivized. Maybe the Bucks don't get the pick haul they want or that they could have gotten had they done this a year ago, but you could still talk me into it if it's literally just Alperen Şengün, who I think we both agree is a little bit flawed in terms of his fit long-term alongside the current young core. But in terms of the draft premium and inherently shortening the timeline, yeah, I don't see it. I don't think it'll make sense. I don't know that Giannis will even want the West, given the factors that we just laid out. To me, the draft path makes the most sense. And so,
yeah,
go ahead.
Just before you go into going into this the Giannis sweepstakes, I'm hoping that OKC or the Spurs make what would be a lesser mistake, but still a mistake of trading for him in an attempt to establish themselves clearly above the other for the next 2 or 3 years. Like, there is an argument to be made even for the Spurs that you strike while the iron is hot, and you can never be sure that Wemby won't be like Yao, for example. And, maybe you want a three-peat right now. Could be justified, but still, I would be happy if that happened, because that would mean that the long term, they're probably within striking distance without too much of outlier things happening.
And so that leaves you with 2 realistic paths this offseason, which is staying the course, making moves around the margins, and that's not indefensible. Like, I think people sort of misread that as an endorsement of the status quo and saying, well, you believe that this team is just a Fred and Steven away. I don't think, and a healthy Kevin Durant in the playoffs. I don't think it's saying that. I think it would be saying that, even if this team has a clear ceiling, which they probably don't want to say on the record because you want to at least keep hope alive, and who knows, maybe next year both Wemby and SGA suffer serious injuries. You never know. Like, it's a crazy league. Sometimes the stars can align. The Pacers, be it in the East, had the stars align a year ago, and maybe came Tyrese Halliburton's Achilles from, 1 game away from actually winning an NBA championship. So you never want to say that on the record. But I think internally they would know that this team, as currently constructed, is not likely to get to the Thunder or Spurs level. And I think some will say, then what's the point? Well, I think they view themselves as in a pretty good situation already with future draft picks. Next year, you have 2 likely coming in from the Nets and the Suns. You've got the Suns and the Mavs in 2029. You've got your own picks moving forward, or at least control of them. Next year, it is a swap right with the Nets. And so you could stay the course and still be at a good spot to have a lot of bites at the apple moving forward. And really, it may be the best spot possible with the NBA flattening its lottery odds even more to discourage tanking. It's not a situation like it used to be where either you're all in or you rebuild. I feel like that's what Rockets fans are used to, because there were, it felt like 7, 8 straight years of constantly going for it with James Harden and Joel Morey, followed by 3 years of just total bottoming out. I think that's the type of situation that the NBA wants to discourage moving forward, the all-out tanking. So even if the Rockets conceivably could tank, and I don't think they're close to that from a roster perspective, I don't think that's the way to do it under the current NBA, or what will soon be their new odds system, more and more flat. I think what you want is more bites at the apple, which the Rockets have, combining their own picks with the equity that I just listed from other teams. And you don't want to do it simply by tanking. You want to, have a diversified portfolio, so to speak. So you can't depend on just bottoming out and having 1 or 2 really awful seasons and getting what you need to load up again. No, what you need is a long period of time with, several moderate chunks, moderate bites at the apple, if you will, and hopefully some of those pan out. Or maybe you get lucky and, you draft a true difference maker. We should point out, while unlikely, Nikola Jokic was a 2nd-round pick. Giannis was a mid-first, or was he a late first? When was Giannis drafted? Do you remember?
Late lotto, I believe.
Yeah. So the point is, like, there are some outliers like that you could hope for, you don't plan on. But I think going forward in the NBA, it's going to be quantity over quality. So I do think you could sort of run it back, and it wouldn't be saying, oh, we think Fred and Steven and a healthy KD in the playoffs is going to give us a chance against those 2 teams, even if they don't want to say it on the record. It could be that hey, this is just the best path forward if we don't think a great value deal is there. And we'll bet on these picks eventually giving us our best chance to actually, take that leap forward, to go up a tier, or at least get closer than they are now. But then the other possibility is the strategic step back plan. And what I keep coming back to, Paolo, like, you can certainly question the fit, and you have with Alperen Şengün, I understand where that comes from. Dave Hardesty, who I do the YouTube shows with over at Clutch Fans, he's endorsed this blend as well. But I also wonder about Kevin Durant, because if internally you sort of know that, you're trying to win games, but it's unrealistic to think that next year's team has a championship ceiling in this West, then I do wonder just how much sense a 38-year-old Kevin Durant makes in that environment. Now, it's one thing if you believe that he's good for the development of the younger players that you're trying to get better. The current young core of 5 first-round picks between 2021 and 2024, Şengün, Jabari Antari, Amen, and Reed. If you think he's good for their development, and if you think he'd be good for, if they bring in 1 or 2 first-round rookies next year from the Suns and the Nets, then okay. But I don't know, as currently constructed, if Kevin Durant is that guy. Like, I don't think the burner scandal was as transformative as the way a lot of NBA social media wants to make it out to be. But it wasn't nothing. And I think the reports of moodiness and the complicated, day-to-day environment, I think that's real. I think there's something to that. And so if you aren't able to compete at the highest level and you do have a ceiling, then you don't want to bottom out. There's no reason to tank, so to speak, for the reasons I just outlined. But I also think it's important to have the right type of bets. Fred VanVleet, Steven Adams, those are the right type of bets. They will, bring out the best in those young guys. I'm not saying Kevin Durant's going to bring out the worst, but I also don't think he's necessarily going to be maximized in that environment. So I do wonder if maybe it makes sense to explore KD trades to someone that's, a little more incentivized to try and win now. Maybe you re-explore the Timberwolves concept that we know they wanted him last offseason, but KD preferred the Rockets at that time. Timberwolves and Anthony Edwards have more of an incentive to place a premium on the next couple of years. Maybe that concept, something along those lines, is revisited. I just feel like you're not going to be all in, and it also doesn't make sense to tank and just start anew. You're going to be in this sort of middle ground that's unfamiliar for a lot of this fan base and really the entire organization, because they haven't been at a spot like this in a while. So I think you want to balance. Like, you do want veterans that will help you win, that will help the young guys grow, but you do want to make sure that you're maximizing roster spots, maximizing assets, doing what you can to put the team in the right position to eventually take a leap forward. And I'm just not sure in this environment if a 38-year-old Kevin Durant makes the most sense. Now, that's not me saying you trade him just to trade him. No, he's still a very, very good player. So if the value isn't there, yeah, like I would keep Kevin rather than trade him for the sake of trading him and taking a bad deal. They're not desperate, but I would at least explore the market in terms of the timeline, in terms of, the locker room next season, your rosters for seasons beyond next year when Kevin, at some point, be it when he's 39, 40, 41, eventually he's going to age out and or retire. I just wonder in this environment if you can do more with that roster slot when you come to grips with the reality, or I shouldn't say the roster spot, it's more the asset, when you come to grips with the reality that this team probably isn't going to be contending next season. So I'm just curious your thoughts on that, Paolo, the merits of, staying the course versus strategic step back. And, I guess my thought, because for all the talk about strategic step back, maybe, involving a Şengün trade, which we'll get to. By the way, I do think the way the lottery shook out, I promised off the top, we talk a little bit about that. And I think the teams between 4 and 7, the Bulls have never shown much of an appetite for being patient. they're at 4. The Clippers with Kawhi, as long as he's on the roster, a potential win now candidate for Şengün or KD. The Nets and Kings at 6 and 7 thought they'd be a lot higher, and so I could see them looking for more of a splash, a 2-time All-Star, which Alperen Şengün, despite his flaws, certainly is. I could see that bringing a little bit more juice than yet another good but not top-tier rookie, another young guy in a franchise that's already brought in so many in recent years. Like, I could see the way the draft lottery played out, opening up more possibilities on the Şengün front. But I could also see in this environment, and maybe it's both. Like you talked about this on the last pod. You don't have to choose. Maybe it can be both. And, it's even more of a full-fledged strategic step back. I don't know. But I guess just in this environment, I have more questions than ever about not just Şengün, but KD. How do they fit on next year's team? And, what's their blueprint long-term in terms of when and how the Rockets can actually get to, an OKC or San Antonio level?
Yeah, I think it depends on value, right? Because to me, ideally, if you get a good enough return, and then my definition of a good enough return is perhaps lower than most people's, I would say move both is the optimal scenario. To me, the optimal scenario, I think I talked about this on the last pod. Optimal scenario is you scale it back, you trade Şengün and you trade KD because he's old, and Şengün because I don't believe, as you said before, center that can't shoot and can't play defense. I don't think that's a recipe for success in any way. I don't think you can win with that or win at the highest level with that. So Şengün because of that. But at the same time, because of the changes in the lottery, you don't want to be the worst team in the league. And so I think we can be a play-in level team or a little bit below that if we just keep Amen Thompson, Tyrese, and Jabari Smith Jr., Reed Shepard, and we build a functional team around it. Like you bring in Fred back, you bring Steven Adams, you try and get a stretch big and see how Amen Thompson plays in 5-out spacing, and you test those things out. And I think the team level of a roster with Ime Udoka, if you trade KD and Şengün for assets, that level roster will put you in that sweet spot in the new lottery out. Sorry, Ben.
And let me interject real quickly. I mentioned the swap in 2027. It should be pointed out that swap with the Nets does not activate until after the draft lottery. So in terms of actually getting a high pick in 2027, and I've heard, and it's been reported, the talk of the 2027 draft being, so much weaker than 2026, maybe relative to 26, which is a really good draft, there's a decline, but it's not viewed around the league as a terrible draft by any means. It's a lot better from what I've heard than 24, which looks like one of the worst drafts of this decade. Unfortunately for the Rockets, that's when they had the number 3, although could have taken Steph Castle. Who knows if Steph would look the same in this system with the Rockets? It's hard to say. And the surrounding pieces, another guy that can't shoot, Amen Thompson. But the point is, I'm not convinced that the 2027 draft is going to be like 2024 or the downer that a lot of folks, at least on social media, seem to be convinced that it will be. Maybe relative to 2026, where there's a lot of really intriguing players in the lottery, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be a bad draft at all. And to the point of considering trades and its implications for next season, you can basically have 3 bites at the apple. If the Rockets, let's say they're a play-in team and they don't make the playoffs, which I know, isn't fun to talk about, but in this world where they trade 2 all-stars, it's not inconceivable. You could have the Nets, the Suns, and the Rockets. You could combine all 3 of those and have, 3 chances at a top 3, 4, whatever the new lottery ends up being, however many top picks they're drawing for. So you would still have to give the other one to the Nets from that swap right. But the point is, in terms of actually getting the number 1 or something very high in the order that can land you a transformative player, the Rockets having control of their own odds as well in 2027, and the fact that the swap happens after the lottery, it does allow you to game the system if you want. So I still don't think the Rockets are going to be bad next season, but it's more of an option than people think. I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, 100%. But it goes back to what I was telling you about. It depends on the value that you get. I think you trade KD. I mean, even KD, I'm not going to say you trade him no matter what, because I don't think that's fair.
Same.
I think if the value is just terrible, like if people are offering you expiring money and a late first round pick for KD, then I wouldn't do it. If they're offering pick 14, 15, 16 for KD, I might. Plus expiring salary, I might do it. because I think this draft going to maybe the top, probably 16, 17 is pretty good, and there's some upside swings, which is in an NBA in which you have two dynasties brewing, the value of an upside swing in a draft goes up relative to lower ceiling, higher floor, all-star level projections versus superstar level projections, because that's probably what you're going to need if you're going to make it past these teams. If you go back, like Giannis Antetokounmpo, if you go back and look at his draft profile, he was not, first of all, he wasn't necessarily going to be this type of player. I think he played shooting guard or small forward. He was a really wiry Paul George type. Well, Paul George was a better prospect, but in the sense that, this really wiry, like a really long athlete that had a handle, and you could make the case to scale him up or scale him down a position. But the value of that type of player goes up in scenarios like this because you're swinging for the fences. So going back to trading Şengün or KD or both, if you don't get good enough value, you can just run it back and you treat this year as we'll throw our name in the basket, and maybe if they both get hurt, like for that chance, if you're not gonna get good enough value, you might as well run that chance, and maybe it works out well for you. Or maybe they strike lightning in a bottle, as unlikely as it may be. If the return isn't good enough, like it's the same thing as a lottery ticket, right? If someone gives you a lottery ticket and you have it, you're likely not gonna get, likely not gonna win the lottery. If someone offers you double the price of a lottery ticket, for example, or a good value for it, you might even sell it. But if someone offers you 5 cents for it, you might as well keep it just in case. And I think that's the way the Rockets should look at the offseason, right? If you can't get good enough value for those two guys, I think you just run it back and you hope that it goes well. And you hope that their value increases. It might decrease if things burn out, but you hope that their value increases. But then again, ideally, like if you can get a good pick this year for Şengün, or a couple of future picks for Şengün that have low protections on it that you can, reasonably expect, that they could become high ceiling players. And for KD, if you can get, to me, a late lottery pick this year for him, I think that would make sense as well. I'm not sure if you could, but once you move on from those guys, you can see truly what is the ceiling with Amen Thompson. You can give him the reps to be able to, within an ecosystem and within a space in which he can thrive with shooting around him, you can see, well, can we realistically project Amen Thompson to be one of those top 1%, top 10, top 15 players in the league that will give us a shot against a team like Wemby, or a team with Wemby, or a team like OKC? Now, and then this is where I want to throw it back to you, because this is something that I struggle with that I didn't even think about back in the Murray days. There is something to be said for a team that is stuck or is playing this limbo of not wanting to invest into the team, and at the same time you don't want to be the worst team in the league because you want to have good odds, which is how you manage the buy-in in the locker room. Because players aren't, like, social media is everywhere, right? Shows like ours are everywhere. Players sometimes listen to them. How do you manage the expectation of a locker room where you're neither going for it 100%, nor are you at a point where you can expect organic growth? Because up to this point, the Rockets have had growth year over year. If you choose to take a step back, you're going to have to sell ownership on it, but you're likely also going to have to sell the players on it so they don't develop bad habits and a losing attitude. And a rugged head coach like Ime Udoka's voice in the locker room only goes so long, especially when the vibe from, and obviously you don't say this to the players, but the players have access to some social media, they know, when the vibe is not, oh, we're trying to be as good as we can possibly be, or the team is investing in us going forward. Like, how do you manage that expectation in the locker room and not stunt player development by players getting the sense that, well, we don't really believe that this is our year, but at the same time, there's not really that much growth from us in particular that's expected. But I mean, it's for guys like Tyrese or Jabari Smith Jr., for example.
Can I interject? I think this is why Fred VanVleet specifically is going to be so important to next year's team, and why I think a lot of people on social media are sleeping on him at the moment. I get he's sort of turned into this symbol or this figurehead that people think the Rockets have invested too much in him over the years, and he's sort of a symbol of, going back to when they chose him over Harden in 2023 free agency. And so he's turned into, I guess, a symbol of people's frustrations with Rafael Stone and or Ime Udoka. But in terms of that dynamic that you're just describing, Fred was so good at that his 2 playing seasons with the Rockets when they were in that sort of middle ground in which they wanted to win. And they did take clear steps forward in both years, from 22 wins to 41 the first year, from 41 to 52 the second year. The young players got better. Alperen Şengün took a leap to an all-star level. The culture, the chemistry was great. People are hating on Fred pulling, small sample size PRA stats, points, rebounds, and assists off of one regular season and missing the forest for the trees. This guy contributes to winning. He contributes to culture. You look at the results. I did some digging today. Year 1 with the Rockets, in the 73 games that Fred played, they were 38-35. Without him, they were 3-6. So I know it's a small sample, the 9 games without him, but that's the difference between a winning team and something sub 30. Last year, they were 11-11 in the 22 games that he missed that contributed to the regular season sample being a little small. And then they were 41-19 in the 60 that he played, which is a win pace of more than 56 games. So difference of more than 15 games in terms of win pace, 41-41 versus 56 plus with Fred playing. And then you got to the playoffs, and he was by far your biggest playoff riser. He was the reason you had a chance to beat a much better team, the Warriors, relative to the injury-ravaged version of the Lakers that you couldn't even get that close to beating this year. So I understand people are sort of, and Fred didn't play this year because of the ACL, so I get that it's frustrating. There was the no trade added in because of the 1+1 that the Rockets restructured last offseason. So we'll talk about that more in future shows when we look at some of the financial options this offseason. But just from like an X's and O's standpoint, to me, Fred VanVleet is even more important in that environment that you're describing. And I just want to hit that home. Like, for all the frustrations about, big picture, the Rockets, what's the organizational vision, the alignment, and what have you, it shouldn't be forgotten that Fred VanVleet is a very good basketball player that contributes to winning, and he contributes to the development and growth of the young core. And so he would be even more important, I think, in that type of environment that you're describing, assuming he comes back healthy, which, you have to wait and see. But if he's out there at anywhere close to 100%, he would be very helpful to overcome some of those issues.
Well, yes, I do agree with you, and I do think that bringing Fred back, even as a stabilizing force, is valuable. And as a vet, like, the strip it down, have no vets, be all young guys thing, that's a thing of the past with the new areas. Like, vets are going to be a lot more valuable because teams are not going to want to be that poor. And the way you aren't that bad is by meshing vets with the young guys and trying to develop it that way, which is a lot healthier for the league, I think. I generally like the new rules, and so keeping Fred is valuable. That's also one of the things that might make it so someone like Alperen Şengün is more valuable. Someone who has a high floor, your team a high floor and a lower ceiling. You're not gonna, it's not like it's gonna make him more valuable in a vacuum, but it's gonna make it so more teams are interested in him, which consequently makes him more valuable. And so, but that's not what the Rockets are trying to be moving forward. I think that's mostly for teams that are at the bottom and want to take the step up to being okay, because there's no use being at the bottom. Actually, it's actually discouraged because you're going to get worse odds than you would. So, given that, at the same time, I think a discussion that's really worth having is if you're not going to trade for your top end talent to take you to the level of the Spurs and the Thunder, because if you have to trade for it, that means you don't have the assets that, even if you could have the talent at that point, you don't have the assets to keep up with OKC or the Spurs. That leads you to a different conversation, which is, well, if you can trade for it, then you got to draft it. And I think that opens up a whole new can of worms when we talk about what Houston has done in the past and what your confidence level is moving forward, that this is the correct regime still to be able to do that and then thread that line. Because I think, we as a pod are generally approving of the front office up to this point. And to me, that comes mostly from the smart in between, like, margin moves, in the sense that they're good with contracts, and there seems to be a clear path forward, and they've generally gotten good value on trades when they were selling it. Like, generally, and the small things like trading small contracts or taking on small contracts when they were tanking for picks, it has always kind of made sense. Now, with the new lottery odds in particular, I think something that's really, really important now is good drafting and good development. And I'll touch on it really lightly before I pass it off to you, because I have a developing opinion, but it's not too firm yet. I think drafting wise, they are maybe at a B. I think they haven't been put in the best positions to draft because, well, going back, I think they have one clear mistake, and that's taking Jalen Green. And me saying this is a little bit ironic and revisionist because I did have Jalen Green above Evan Mobley. But even if it wasn't Evan Mobley, I think it wasn't out of the question that the Rockets could have drafted the two, Mobley or Barnes, for example. Like, those were the top four, and those both clearly better than Jalen Green. But I think that pick was clearly a mistake. I would argue, and although trading up for Sengun at pick 16 was clearly good value, they traded two picks that ended up not being good at all. I think one of them didn't. I think both of them didn't even convert. For Sengun, that's clearly good value and a good trade at that spot. Personally, I would have expected them to take Trey Murphy just because he's so much more aligned with what the Rockets' philosophy is and how analytics driven they are, and how that is just a perfect player for what the Rockets have always believed in, and what a lot of the people still within the front office with the analytics part of it still believe with shooting and defense. At 16, Sengun is a really good pick and a really good trade, but it could have been better with Trey Murphy taken just one spot later, and I think that's fair to at least put some weight on it. So I think the 2021 draft and then the later picks were just awful. Although I do think Garuba could have been more than what he was, but didn't really get the chance. I think 2021 drafting wise was not good. I think the year after with Jabari, you're just in a spot there where there's nobody else you can take. Unless you're going to take Jalen Williams, there's nobody else there that is even reasonable to take that's been better than Jabari. Jaden Ivey has been, well, Jaden Ivey was the guy that was in consideration for most teams and most experts. Jaden Ivey was a complete disaster. So they made the correct pick then. I think Tari Eason at 17, I believe that year, was also a home run pick for the value that they've gotten. I think a lot of people are lower on Tari Eason. I still believe. And I still think he's a very valuable player, especially for pick 17. I think that was a really good draft. But not necessarily, but because of the value they got, but not necessarily, and because of what it was available, but not necessarily in drafting star talent. In that case in particular, they were unlucky in which the talent available and the best picks at the spots they had the draft picks for weren't necessarily star players. But those are two of the guys that I would keep long term because I think they fit into any team. Which leads us to the year after, which is the Man Thompson year, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Amen and Cam.
Yeah, I think Amen was clearly the correct pick at that moment, but we still haven't had time to develop him to what we need him to be for him to be that superstar talent. But I think that's the correct pick. Cam, I think it's the correct pick. It's an upside swing that didn't pan out, so and it's not like you could have gotten much better there. And late picks are generally a crapshoot. So I'm not going to get into that one as well. The Ty Washington trade, the Ty Washington pick the year before that I forgot. It's a really late first round pick. You're just hoping for something there. It didn't pan out, so I don't blame them for that one. And then the year later, they got to pick 3 in a generationally bad draft, and we haven't seen what Reed Shepard can do. We've seen a lot more from Castle than we've seen from Reed, but the contexts are so different. Like, I would strongly defend that if you switch places, Reed's having a better career at this point with the Spurs than Castle is with the Rockets. Just when you play like with a guy like Troy Wembanyama, and then the warping he does of the floor and how easy it is to get assists with him, and then in the space you get to operate compared to what Reed has, it's just, I don't think it's comparable. And I don't think that was necessarily a bad pick. So I think drafting wise, I think they messed up year one. But then after that, it's just that they haven't really been put in positions to draft superstar type talent at the draft areas that they've had. Which, sorry, I know I said I will take not that much time, but I'll get into what I think is the bigger issue, which is bad player development. And I think that's something that people don't really think about because it's really hard to differentiate what's bad player development from what is the player just doesn't have the talent for it, right? But I think some of it has to be player development, and I think Jalen Green is a massive failure of player development. A guy that has all the tools, that seems to have all of the skill sets, all of the talent, and you weren't able to make a good player out of him. And I think he showed little to no progression throughout the years he was here with Houston. Besides the 1 year with Udoka, where I think it was more of a mentality shift, in which I did think he progressed defensively that season, and I do think he's a decent on-ball defender. But other than that, scoring-wise, like you weren't able to make anything out of that athlete, that phenomenal athlete that had skill.
Although I will push back, it wasn't just Ime Udoka. That should be noted. A lot of these issues, Jalen had 2 years with Steven Silas. He also had this year in Phoenix, where I know he didn't play a lot due to injuries, but he's had 3 different coaching staffs that have not been able to, overcome these deficiencies. Like, he's improved in some areas, but just want to hit home that, you're right about the overall lack of development. But in Jalen's case, I do think it's a little bit more about the player because we've been through 3 different coaching staffs and they all have the same issues.
Well, it's hard to see with this year because his season was cut short. There were so few games, but I know that the games that he did play, he looked the exact same. And then, which is why, for all of these players, all of the players I'm going to talk about, we haven't really seen them with different teams to be able to tell if there was something there. And it's not even fair to look at it like that because sometimes it is there for a certain period of time, and then players settle into different versions of themselves, and they don't reach that ceiling even though they get better on other teams. I think this entire argument about player development, it's a crapshoot because we're not in the building, and this is not 2K. You don't have original stats and original potential, and you see if they got into it or not. This is all projection, right? But I do think it's fair to say that just basketball skills-wise, I think Jalen Green was a failure of development. Whether he could have been better or not, who knows? But I do think that Rockets failed to develop him, even if there wasn't that much more to get out of it. With Sengun, I think he got better with his instincts defensively over time. I think he lost a lot of wiggle to his game. I think maybe they tried to streamline his game in the way that they did with Harden. That didn't work at all. He's just lost a little bit of his magic, whether that be to injuries. I think there were developments in his offensive game in the sense that he learned to shoot mid-range shots and they looked better than they did before. A little bit more of a face-up game. The floater got better. He was more of a back to the basket, under the basket type player when he first came on. But he lost a lot of the flair that he had. I'm not even sure Alperen Sengun's a success story developmental wise. Even if he was an all-star, he was a fringe all-star. And there's arguments to be made that the improvements defensively were a product of a system, although part of them have to be player development as well, because he was a mess on that end earlier on in his career. But I do think that development with Sengun was okay, but it was not something great. It's not like you were able to turn him into a player that we now want to keep. So I think, and then Josh Christopher and Usman Garuba, they aren't success stories. They're not necessarily failure stories either. That's just how it goes with late first round picks. Sometimes you get them, sometimes you don't. Or sometimes they turn into something that sometimes they don't. But they were opportunities, like the raw play, I guess, was there to be molded with those guys. It just didn't get much of an opportunity and didn't eventually become players, but they didn't anywhere else either. So, and then moving forward, I think Jabari Smith is a success story. He's a much better player than he was coming in basically all facets of his game. He was also really raw coming in at anything other than shooting, and even his shooting was with very limited range in college, like a lot of college range threes. When they translated to NBA threes in the league, it wasn't there, but now it is. He is an average shooter. He is someone with a pull-up game. He is someone who can dribble. He's someone who can attack closeouts. A lot of stuff that he just wasn't able to do. I do think that Jabari Smith Jr. is the success story in terms of development. Still wasn't enough to produce a star. Tari Eason, I think, I think he's gotten some craft around the rim compared to back then. And I think perhaps a better shooter, who knows, but not necessarily major developments, not like they were expected, because Harrison was a very already NBA-ready guy. And then you move forward, Amen Thompson. I disagree with most people who say he hasn't improved that much. I think he's improved a lot coming into this season. I think he was already very good at one thing. I think now he's taken steps in the right direction with his offensive game. We'll see how that continues to translate. I mean, he's a year 3. Yeah, he's going into year 4 now. So we'll see how he continues to develop, but I don't think you can go either way with him. I think when you talk about development, I think it's definitely something that can be said. I think they clearly failed with Jalen Green. I think Will Albrecht, when he got better, I think he could have gotten even better. He got worse at some things. Like at this moment, if you look at the season, like he's not an efficient scorer from anywhere on the floor. The defense seems to have fallen off a cliff. Playmaking, he's gotten more assists, but turnovers are off the charts, and it doesn't seem like he has that, I guess, pizzazz that he had when he was a rookie. And maybe that was streamlining his game for efficiency, but the efficiency didn't come along with it. So I think that in general was a failure. Well, not necessarily a failure, but I don't think that's a success story. I think it's just an okay story. So, sorry for I know I've gone on. I said I would take 2 minutes. I think I've taken like 15. But but that's the story of our lives in this plot. But going forward, like, do you trust this front office to continue to lead a developmental drafting-based strategy going forward by leading the path? I think me and you agree with would be the best path, which is taking step back so you can take 2 steps forward and then building perhaps through the draft so you can get high upside guys again, besides Amen Thompson. I don't have a verdict. I think a lot of people would say it's like clearly they aren't, because they haven't seen a superstar come out of 3 years of tanking and plus a top 3 pick in another draft. I think when you take into consideration all of the nuance to it, I think they haven't been terrible, but I don't think they've been brilliant either.
Right.
And I think a lot of the context clues tell you that they've done well in some cases, they've done poorly in others, and then the cases where they've done well, particularly Jabari Smith Jr., doing well with Jabari was never turning him into an all-star. And then the other particular case is Amen Thompson, where doing well with Amen Thompson is turning him into a superstar. I think we're well on pace. If we look at his stats going season to season, he was clearly just a rebounding shutdown defense wing year 1, and that's what he did, and he was good at it. And then year 2, there was that clear increase in playing time and the all defense first team, and being able to get himself into good positions on the floor to score, given his in complementary ways, given his skill set, and he did that. And then this season he was trusted with a lot more responsibility. And for all the people that want to talk trash about it, I mean, he had I can look it up, and I'm pretty sure I know the numbers. He had an 18, 8 and 5 season with a higher than 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. Like that's a 4 point per game increase, a 2 assist per game increase, with only a 0.4 turnover per game increase, and trusted with a lot more responsibility, still without the best spacing around him. Like you go from even just points per game wise, you go from 9 to 14 to 18, and then in the playoffs, I think he was even better than that. And I mean, there's steady progression there. And he was always going to be a guy that you had to invest heavily into because of the limitations to his game. And I think he's progressed, even though the shot isn't necessarily there. You look at his free throw percentage, and he went from a guy that was shooting 69% from one season to a guy that shot 78% on the other. That's a 10% increase that doesn't come from nowhere. Like, there's clearly been steady improvement. We've just not gotten to the point where he's a superstar, but I don't necessarily think he should have been a superstar yet. So yeah, sorry for ranting, but going forward, I don't think you can say it one way or the other, and I think 1 or 2 years drafting high or in the lottery again would probably seal the deal. Like, I think in 1 or 2 years, you've gotten all the information on Amen Thompson, and you know if they've been able to convert him to a star or not. And in 1 or 2 more years, you get a couple more young players if you do follow the strategy that we talked about. And you see, well, did they draft well in those scenarios? I guess it goes back to what I said in the pod with Fletch, I think. The question is not necessarily whether they've been great or bad, because I think in those particular factors of being a GM and being a front office, I think they've gotten passing grades, not great, not awful. It's about, if you go to the market to get a new regime, are you going to get better or worse? Because I think there's all worse around the league. And you obviously want to have a success story, but you don't want to give up on a good regime too soon if the next regime is not going to be... You don't want to give up on a average, or I don't think they're average. I think they're average to good. Or you don't want to give up on a good front office in hopes for a great one, when most of the scenarios after a good front office are worse, without knowing for sure that the good front office has a ceiling in terms of developing talent and drafting it. So it's hard. Like it's hard to make that decision, but I think you just have to give it more time.
I'll be quick. I largely agree with you. It's a mixed bag rather than conclusive in either direction. I think after the season the Rockets just had, a lot of folks want a pinata. They want a one-size-fits-all scapegoat. And since Rafael and Ime are the leadership figures for the organization, it's easy to point to them. However, both in terms of drafting and development, there's misses, but there's also clear success stories. I think in terms of drafting, so much of it's going to come down to Reed Sheppard. I think, looking beyond the top 5 picks, even with the misses in the 20s, look, Şengün and Tari Easton at their draft slots are home runs. So I think they've done a capable job. It just comes down to, the misses at the top. You had 4 top 4 selections actually. Are 50% of them bust, or are 25%? If it's 25%, if Jalen is the only one, then you can easily accept it. Like, even good front offices are going to have misses when you give them 4 different times. Like, the bust rate in the NBA is not close to 0, even high in the draft. And it wasn't even if we consider Jalen a bust relative to his draft slot, his potential, they did mitigate the damage by using his salary slot in the Kevin Durant trade. I think for the reasons you laid out, even if neither becomes a full-fledged star, Jabari and Amen were good picks where they were selected and are developing well. If Reed is a miss, that could be the one that defines the Rafael Stone era. If 50% of those 4 straight top 4 picks end up being bust, that would look pretty bad. Not necessarily catastrophic, but certainly not good. But I just think it's way too early to conclusively say that about Reed after 2 seasons, especially when this past year, I know he ended it on a bit of a downer in the playoffs, but he had some very high highs in the regular season. And I think it would absolutely be a mistake to, at 21 years old, after his second season, to really his first as a consistent player, to draw any firm conclusions about Reed Sheppard. So I would say in terms of drafting, mixed bag, development, as you mentioned, like, some haven't developed, but most of them, Jabari, Amen, clear steps forward. Şengün, at least in some ways. Same with Tari. Reed is definitely a better player relative to this time a year ago. There's some hits, there's some misses. And the final point I'll make, even if ultimately the bad outweighs the good, then okay, you can change the GM or you can change the head coach a year from now. I mentioned in the last pod, like, it wasn't the time to draw a firm conclusion this year, but, the seats are a little warmer. I don't think they're hot, but I think if next year is similarly underwhelming and we see more of this development appear stalled, then yeah, at either spot, be it the GM, the coach, or maybe even both, like, maybe we're having a different conversation a year from now. So I just think in terms of, the woe is us framing, I think it's over the top. I think, for starters, it hasn't been all bad. There are some wins, both in terms of drafting and development with the current regime, and reasons to think that, with future picks, there's no reason to say, oh, they're just not going to work out because it's us and the Rockets won't be able to figure it out. No, there are some success stories. And secondly, if it turns out that one or both of Rafael and Ime aren't performing to the level that they need to build a championship team, okay, then you can change that down the road before some of those future picks are made and or developed. So that's just, I get not being all the way in, but you don't have to be all the way out either. There's no reason to look at this situation and say a drafting and development plan is inherently flawed because we just won't be able to draft or develop. Like, there's a lot left on the table.
Yeah, and thinking about the timing of it all, Next offseason is exactly when you want to be making that call, because that's right before you have the Brooklyn pick, the Suns pick, or the Rockets pick, depending on how those land. And going into it, you would be a pretty desirable spot for a GM to come in. You'd have the assets, you'd have young players, and you'd have a good market. And I think that something that's underrated is the fact that the Rockets went through a rebuild, a full-on rebuild, with 3 years of being really bad. But the organization in general didn't lose its prestige around the league, because after that 3-year period, then they had 2 years of being a playoff team without, going full sellout for superstars. And I think that buys you some respect, and that keeps your reputation as an organization up there. It's not like we're good with James Harden and then we're bad for 8 straight years, right? Which is what would have happened if you started the rebuild, didn't necessarily get to the playoffs, and then started the rebuild again. No, you were good for the last 2. You proved that you had a plan, and that plan came to fruition. But then you realized that plan didn't have the ceiling you wanted, and you wanted to compete for championships, so you took a step back again. And I think that's something that makes sense, and that doesn't turn you into a Kings-like franchise, right? Doesn't turn you into a joke. So you go into next season, and you go into next offseason, and before the draft, you make that decision. And if it's still faith with Ime Udoka and Rafael Stone, then you keep going. And if not, you have a pretty good opening or an enticing job for someone of quality to be brought in to, I guess, take over the franchise at that point. So I think it makes sense in both timelines, is what I would say.
Yep. All right, before we close out, and we can go quickly on this, I just want to end on a positive scenario. I don't know if positive, but at least a fun scenario. We talked about this offline a day or 2 ago, and I'll lead off by saying I think this is 5% at best. I do not expect this for a multitude of reasons, but to give an example of a roster construction scenario this summer that I think could fit on multiple timelines. So there's a certain GOAT candidate who the Rockets just lost to in the playoffs, who's going to be a free agent this summer. And yes, I know he's 41 years old. Obviously, I'm talking about LeBron James. And it has been reported that, the Lakers are sort of wanting to turn the page to the Luka era, build around him on and off the court, and so on and so forth. And Shams Charania reported this week that several teams that were ousted from the playoffs had already contacted LeBron's representation, Rich Paul at Clutch Sports, by the way, also the agent for Fred VanVleet. We know Rich Paul and Rafael Stone have a good relationship, inquiring about the potential of a LeBron addition next season. Now, I personally am not expecting it. I think, in this environment, to bring it full circle, where we're talking about these 2 super teams in OKC and San Antonio, maybe LeBron just retires and wants to spend more time with his family. But more realistically, I think for legacy reasons, for family, he wraps it up either staying the course in LA, where he's clearly comfortable, or goes back to Cleveland and brings it full circle there. I think Lakers or Cavs are by far the most likely scenarios, and then retirement after that. Rockets and anybody else. Like, the juice probably isn't worth the squeeze for a player of his stature when there's not a clear path to a championship by doing so. With that said, LeBron and KD, along with Steph, those are the 3 preeminent players of their generation. LeBron and KD have, outside of the Olympics, never played together before. They are close. There was the report, I think, in 2018 that LeBron actually talked to KD about playing with the Lakers. KD was with the Warriors at the time and didn't choose to do that. He won a second straight NBA Finals MVP, actually, against LeBron and the Cavs. But with LeBron at this stage of his career, he's not going to be playing for money if he plays. It's been reported that he'd probably be an MLE type guy, non-taxpayer, or you could do a sign and trade for a similar amount. I don't know. We can worry about the mechanisms later. But I'm just saying, in a very abstract sense, if you could trade Şengün for a lottery pick in a good draft, bring in LeBron James, who I think even at 41, there's not a drop-off going from Şengün to LeBron, start Jabari at center, LeBron at the 4, where he would be something of a rim protector as well. You'd have Steven Adams and Clint Capella off the bench for more traditional center qualities. I don't think over the next couple of years, going from Şengün to LeBron would be a hit at all to your chances of winning. Might be an increase, even with LeBron in his 40s. And you'd obviously have the lottery pick in a very good draft to develop moving forward in terms of that longer-term window. I am not expecting it at all. I think that's pie in the sky. I think LeBron is extremely likely to finish with the Lakers or Cavs, slight chance of retirement. But if theoretically he was available for a limited cost in terms of finances, any assets you'd have to give up, and you could, perhaps bring out the best of both LeBron and KD playing together, I think it'd make them, even if they're not necessarily championship caliber, the team in that scenario, at least those two guys, I think would be, on board playing with one another. And so maybe that, decreases some of the moodiness factors. I would explore it. I don't think it will be realistic for a number of reasons, but that would be the kind of thing that I think could keep you relevant in the short term. It would be a business boon for Sylvan Fertitta pairing up KD and LeBron, and it would allow you to potentially recoup, a long-term asset for Şengün without giving up any short-term wins in the process. Not expecting it, extremely unrealistic, but just from a fun perspective, it's something. As soon as I saw the reporting of what LeBron could be available at and teams recently ousted from the playoffs inquiring with Rich Paul, it got me wondering. I haven't heard it, don't expect it, but at least for me, it would be fun. Paulo, what do you think about that fantasy world scenario where somehow the Rockets have both LeBron James and Kevin Durant on their roster next season?
Yeah, I think if LeBron were to come here in that same scenario, I think he wants more win now rather than drafting a guy or trading Şengün for a pick. I think maybe you trade Şengün for another win now guy in Steph Curry or something like that. And I don't think that would be worth it. Now, what I do think of the LeBron scenario is my pie in the sky scenario is actually you trade LeBron signs with the Warriors, you trade KD for Butler and pick 16, you get your cake and you get to have your cake
pick
in
11,
number 2.
You mean, right?
Pick 11, sorry, yeah. You draft at 11, you have Jimmy Butler, who is a win now piece that fits the culture, unlike, well, according to some reports, KD, and you go at it again, or maybe you still trade Şengün or whatever you may want to try to do, but the main value being the fact that you get pick 11.
That's probably more realistic, and it would still bring in a big name. And even though Jimmy probably won't be ready for opening night, I do think he'd be a good fit. He'd bring a lot of those Dillon Brooks qualities, and he's a Houston guy. He'd probably want to be here beyond next season. I think culture-wise, he'd be a nice fit with what Ime Udoka wants to have on his team. So that's probably a more realistic one, not as sexy as the admittedly pie in the sky I threw out. But yeah, either way, LeBron could be the domino that I could see the Rockets sort of poking around and seeing if there's a way they could maximize it for their situation somehow to, bring in some juice in the short term, while obviously more important would be whatever assets they can get for long-term use. Anyway, with that, I'll put a bow on this episode. We've already gone on a lot longer than intended, and we'll have more episodes in the weeks ahead talking about more specific scenarios. Just wanted to toss out a couple of admittedly pie-in-the-sky ones today just to get y'all thinking and talking, and then we'll see as the rumor mill starts churning in June as we get closer to the draft, which, if any, have any validity whatsoever. For tonight, we're done, and if you want more from us before the next show, which I think will be middle to late next week, the week of Memorial Day, best place to get it is on social media. My handle is @BenDuBose. Paulo is @Paulo Alves NBA. And this show, the Rockets Launch Pod, presented by Clutch Fans, if you go to LaunchPod790 on Twitter/X and hit up the link tree in the bio, that's got all the links you can need to support the show and its various partners, friends, and sponsors. I mentioned Clutch Fans and its YouTube channel, where I'm still doing shows this offseason with Dave Hardesty. Also, USA Today's Rockets Wire, Sports Talk 790, official flagship radio station of the team, the various podcast distributors for this show. All the links you could need are on the link tree at the LaunchPod 790 page on Twitter/X. All right, with those plugs complete, we'll adjourn. For Paulo Alves, I'm Ben DuBose. As always, we appreciate you so much for listening, and please come back soon for more new episodes of the show.